Welcome to Haunted Close. Ewan's investigation, a haunted times story. The air in Edinburgh is a living thing, thick with the ghosts of sea fog and coal smoke. But the air Ewan Munro breathed now was different. It was dead. Stagnant and heavy, it carried the subterranean chill of stone and forgotten time. He stood at the threshold of a section of Mary King's Close that hadn't seen a tourist's camera flash in over a century. Above him, the polished floors and hushed bureaucracy of the city chambers hummed with modern life. Below, where he stood, were the remains. Not just the famous, sanitized tour route with its theatrical lighting and costumed guides, but the real close. The deep close. Ewan was a structural surveyor, a man of laser levels and ground-penetrating radar. His world was one of measurable stress and predictable decay. He'd been hired by the council to assess the feasibility of excavating these deeper sections, a precursor to a grand and controversial expansion of the tourist attraction. His guide was a man named Alistair, a custodian whose family had worked the closes and winds of the old town for generations. Alistair was all tweed and worry lines, his face a map of the city's grim history. "You'll want to keep your wits about you down here, Mr. Munro," Alistair said, his voice a low rumble that the damp walls seemed to drink. "The official tour. That's for show. This is the marrow." Ewan just nodded, adjusting the powerful lamp on his helmet. He was a pragmatist, a widower whose grief had calcified into a rigid reliance on facts. Ghosts, to him, were a symptom of faulty wiring or overactive imaginations. "Don't worry, Alistair. I'm just here to talk to the stones." "Aye," Alistair muttered, not moving from the iron gate that separated the known from the unknown. "But sometimes, they talk back." He handed Ewan a heavy ring of keys. "This one opens the Skeen Chamber at the far end. No one's been in there since. Well, since they sealed it. Be out by dusk. The generator for the lights is on a timer." Ewan stepped through the gate, the clang of it shutting behind him echoing like a final judgment. The air instantly became 10 degrees colder. The familiar, musty scent of the tourist section was replaced by something sharper, more organic. The smell of rot, not of wood or fabric, but of something deeper. The smell of packed earth and old sickness. His footsteps were the only sound, crunching on a floor of dirt and debris. The beam from his headlamp cut a clean, white swathe through the oppressive dark, revealing narrow, claustrophobic streets that had once been open to the sky. The walls, slick with a black greasy damp, leaned in as if to share a secret. The skeletal remains of doorways led to black voids, former homes now just gaping mouths in the stone. He set up his equipment, the hum of the laser scanner, a comforting intrusion of the 21st century. He worked methodically, mapping the dimensions, noting the subsidence, the water damage. It was a job. A set of problems to be solved with data. But the data was strange. His audio sensors, meant to detect the subtle groans of shifting foundations, were picking up rhythmic low-frequency pulses. Too regular for geology. And his thermal camera kept registering cold spots. Not just cool patches on the walls, but free-floating, man-sized pockets of air that were degrees colder than their surroundings. They would appear for a moment, then vanish. He shook his head, blaming the unique labyrinthine acoustics. The cold spots. Air pockets, trapped and insulated. There was always a rational explanation. He moved deeper, following the winding path of the old close. He passed a section where the walls were covered in crude, desperate scratch marks. Then, he heard it. Faint, at the very edge of his hearing. A sound like a woman weeping. Ewan froze, every muscle tensing. It was a thin, desolate sound, full of a grief so profound it felt ancient. He switched off his scanner. The silence that rushed in was absolute, broken only by the drip, drip, drip of water somewhere in the darkness. The weeping was gone. Acoustic bleed through from the chambers above, he muttered to himself, his own voice sounding hollow and unconvincing. He'd been warned about that. He pressed on, his pragmatism feeling less like a shield and more like a flimsy coat. He reached the end of the main thoroughfare, a heavy oak door bound with rusted iron. The Skeen Chamber. He found the corresponding key, its iron teeth black and pitted. The lock protested with a screech of tortured metal before finally giving way. The air that billowed out was foul, a putrid mix of decay and something else. Something cloyingly sweet, like rotting flowers. He shone his light inside. It was a small, stone-flagged room. Unlike the other spaces, this one wasn't empty. In the center stood a single, small wooden chair. And on the floor around it was a circle of what looked like dried leaves and twigs. No, not leaves. Ewan knelt, his light catching the delicate brittle forms. They were bird skeletons. Dozens of them, arranged in a perfect macabre ring. A prickle of genuine fear, cold and sharp, traced its way up his spine. This wasn't history. This was a ritual. That's when he saw the marks on the wall. Not scratches, but words carved with a desperate, sharp object. The script was archaic, but legible. She weeps for what she lost. She weeps for what she stole. Do not listen. The tears are bait. Suddenly, the weeping started again. Not faint this time. It was close. It sounded like it was right behind him. Ewan spun around, his heart hammering against his ribs. The doorway was empty. But the sound was there, a heartbreaking, liquid sob that seemed to come from the very stones around him. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and sank straight into the soul, pulling at the threads of his own loss. He thought of his wife, Clare, in her final days, her own breath a shallow, rattling sob. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice cracking. The weeping intensified, and with it came a smell. The faint scent of lavender, Clare's favorite. Panic, stark and absolute, seized him. This was impossible. He stumbled back into the chamber, his boots cuffing the circle of bones. The heavy oak door slammed shut with a deafening boom, plunging him into total darkness. His headlamp had gone out. "No, no, no," he whispered, fumbling with the switch. It was dead. He frantically scrabbled for his backup torch in his pack, his fingers clumsy with terror. The weeping was all around him now, inside his head. He could feel the sorrow pressing in, a physical weight trying to crush him. He felt an overwhelming urge to simply lie down on the cold floor and join in the crying, to give in to the abyss of grief that the sound was carving open inside him. His fingers found the torch. He flicked it on. The beam was weak, flickering, but it was light. He aimed it at the door. It wouldn't budge. He was sealed in. Then he saw her. She wasn't in the room. She was on the other side of it, her form indistinct, shimmering like a heat haze in the cold air. A woman, gaunt and skeletal, her face a mask of endless sorrow, tears of black thick liquid running down her sunken cheeks. Her eyes were hollow sockets, but he felt their gaze, a gaze of insatiable hunger. This was not the ghost of a grieving woman. This was grief itself, given form. The lavender scent intensified, and for a terrifying second, the weeping figure's face flickered, morphing into Clare's. "Ewan," the voice whispered, a perfect imitation of his wife's. "It's so cold here. I've been waiting for you." He cried out, a raw, winded sound. This was its trick. The weeper didn't just haunt the close. It fed on the sorrow of the living. It drew you in with your own pain, then consumed you. The bird skeletons. They weren't offerings. They were the remains of its previous meals, small lives lured in by some instinctual echo of the weeping. The figure drifted closer, its form solidifying. The sweet rotten smell was overpowering. Ewan's mind, trained to find logical solutions, was screaming. What was the opposite of sorrow? What was the counteragent to grief? He backed away until his shoulders hit the cold, unforgiving stone of the far wall. The words carved there dug into his back. The tears or bait. He had to deny it. He had to starve it. He closed his eyes, shutting out the horrifying visage of the weeper. He forced himself to see Clare not in her hospital bed, but on their wedding day, laughing, her eyes full of life. He focused on the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of her voice when she was happy, the brilliant burning memory of her life, not the cold shadow of her death. "You're not her," he choked out, his voice shaking but firm. "You are not her. Her memory is mine. You can't have it." The weeping faltered. A shriek of pure rage and frustration replaced the sobs, a sound of grinding stone and tearing fabric that vibrated through his bones. The temperature in the room plummeted. Ice crystals formed on the walls where his breath plumed. "My grief is my own," he shouted into the dark, tears now streaming down his own face, not of sorrow, but of defiance. "It is the price of my love, and you cannot have it." He felt a violent physical shove, as if the entire weight of the close was trying to crush him. The air was sucked from his lungs. He opened his eyes. The weeper was right in front of him, its face inches from his, a vortex of shadow and despair. Its lipless mouth opened in a silent scream. But it was fainter now. Less substantial. He had wounded it by robbing it of its power source. With a final desperate surge of will, he pushed forward, right through the shimmering apparition. It was like plunging into ice water. A soul-deep cold that seared him, but he was through. He crashed against the oak door, which swung open with his weight. He didn't look back. He scrambled out of the Skeen Chamber, into the relative safety of the main passage. His headlamp flickered back to life, its bright clean beam a beacon of sanity. He ran. He fled through the oppressive leaning streets, the sound of scraping claws and furious fading whispers chasing him. He didn't stop until he slammed into the iron gate, rattling it and screaming for Alistair. The gate was wrenched open from the other side. Alistair stood there, his face pale. "I told you," the old man said, his voice trembling as he helped the sobbing, shivering surveyor back into the world of the living. "The close remembers. And it gets hungry." Ewan never finished his survey. His report to the city council was brief and unequivocal. He cited catastrophic, unpredictable seismic instability, toxic subterranean gases, and psychological hazards. He fabricated data, falsified readings, and invented dangers so terrifying that the expansion project was permanently shelved. He saved the tourists from what lay in the deep close. But he knew, with a certainty that was now part of his bones, that he hadn't escaped. Some nights, when the wind blows just right off the Firth of Forth and rattles his window, he can still hear it. A faint, desolate weeping. A sound that reminds him that underneath the thriving city, the old stones are still there. Waiting. And hungry. And now, they knew his name.